Please comment where you are watching in the world, and kindly subscribe to us. When I came across his profile, I wasn't immediately sold, but there was something about his messages, charming, self-deprecating humor, quick replies, that piqued my curiosity. He suggested we meet, and before I could talk myself out of it, I agreed. He wanted to see my favorite hiking trail. It seemed harmless enough. A busy trail, popular even in the rain, more of a scenic walking path than a trek into the wilderness. Looking back, I should have known better. The day of the date, a light rain had started to fall, leaving the air sticky and thick. I pulled into the trailhead parking lot and spotted his car. He was waiting inside, and I joined him to wait out the drizzle. It felt awkward immediately. There's something about sitting in a car with a stranger that makes the silence heavier, the small talk sharper-edged. He seemed normal enough at first, fiddling with his keys and talking about the weather. Then, out of nowhere, he pulled a pill bottle from his pocket, popped it open, and casually took something. "Klonopin," he said. "No big deal. People take medication all the time." But then he turned to me and said, "Want one?" I laughed nervously. "No, I'm good." He asked again a few minutes later, his tone playful but insistent. "Are you sure? Just one. It'll chill you out." I said no, I replied firmly. A faint alarm bell rang in my head. Offering once was weird, but 3 times? That was something else. I brushed it off, though. Maybe he was just awkward. Maybe I was overreacting. When the rain lightened, we started the hike. The forest smelled damp and earthy, the trail lined with towering trees whose leaves dripped from the earlier rain. We walked side by side, talking, or rather, he talked and I listened. He told me about his life, about his wealthy parents who owned a second home in my town. They let him live there rent-free, and recently, he'd turned it into what he called an artist collective. "We're just a bunch of creatives living together," he explained, grinning. "Sharing ideas, making art." When I asked what kind of art they made, his grin faltered. "Oh, he said vaguely. "We're still figuring it out. Mostly we just hang out, drink, and smoke. Build the vibe." I didn't have the heart to point out that didn't sound much like an artist collective. Instead, I told him about nursing school, about how hard I'd worked to get in, and how much I wanted to make a difference. His response caught me off guard. "That sounds like it'd be really hard on me if we were together," he said, his tone almost accusing. "I need someone who can be fully present, My stomach sank. Clingy wasn't even the word for it. Possessive? Controlling? I wasn't sure, but whatever it was, it sent a shiver up my spine. By the time the hike was over, I was already counting down the minutes until the date would end. But it wasn't over yet. He wanted to stop by Target, and I felt too awkward to say no. Inside the store, he wandered the aisles aimlessly, picking up a laundry basket and several kinds of socks. More socks than any one person could reasonably need. His sense of humor, which had seemed endearing in text, took on a strange, almost childish edge. He made bizarre noises at other shoppers, drawing confused glances and making me cringe, so hard I wanted to disappear into the floor. When it was finally time to leave, I drove him back to his car at the trailhead. Relief washed over me as I said goodbye, but it was short-lived. When I got home, I realized he'd left his socks in my back seat. Great. Now I had to see him again to give them back. That's when I noticed my phone had died. Plugging it in, I was greeted by a flood of missed calls and texts. 15 missed calls. Dozens of messages. My heart sank as I scrolled through them, all variations of "Are you okay?" and "Please respond." It had only been an hour since we'd parted ways. 1 hour. I felt the creepiness crawl over me like a second skin. This wasn't normal. This wasn't okay. I texted him back to let him know I was fine, but made it clear that I didn't feel a connection and didn't want to take things further. His response was intense. The calls and texts didn't stop. By the next day, he'd sent more messages, still asking if I was okay. "I had a dream you died," one of them said. It felt so real. I even searched for your name in the news to make sure it didn't happen. I didn't reply. What could I even say to that? I started ignoring the messages, hoping he'd get the hint. But then, a text came that sent a chill down my spine. "Fine. This is how supervillains are born." Supervillains? Was that supposed to be a joke? A threat? I didn't wait to find out. I blocked his number and deleted his messages. For days afterward, I felt a lingering unease, like his presence was still hovering over me. I replayed the date in my mind, trying to figure out where it had gone so wrong, why I hadn't seen the red flags earlier. The Klonopin, the artist collective, the possessive comment about nursing school, it all seemed so obvious in hindsight. But at the time, I'd chalked it up to nerves, to quirks, to anything other than what it truly was, a disaster waiting to unfold. The night began like so many others in my college life, late, lazy, and entirely unremarkable. I was scrolling through my OkCupid messages when a new one popped up, the notification breaking the monotony of my evening. It was her. Her profile had been average, not someone I'd swipe on instinctively, but her messages were engaging enough to pique my interest. She was quick with her words, seemed eager to meet, and when she suggested grabbing food, I figured why not. It was already 9 p.m., I hadn't eaten yet, and a diner meetup sounded harmless enough. I told myself it wouldn't be life-changing, just a casual dinner, a chance to connect. But what unfolded that night was something I could never have anticipated, something so bizarre and nightmarish it would live rent-free in my head for years. When I pulled up to the local diner, I was still trying to temper my expectations. Her profile picture, though not exactly my type, had been perfectly reasonable. But as soon as she walked through the door, I felt my stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. She wasn't what I'd expected. At all. Standing before me was a woman about 5 feet 2 inches, and somewhere in the range of 190 to 210 pounds. That in itself wasn't an issue. People looked different in real life, and I was prepared to roll with it. But there was something about her demeanor, her presence, that was toadish. Her movements were awkward, her smile forced, her energy heavy in a way that sucked the air out of the room. I tried to shrug it off. Looks weren't everything, and first impressions could be deceiving. Then I noticed she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her was a friend. And not just any friend, a 16-year-old girl. My date, by the way, was 20. I was 22. I froze for a moment, confused, as my mind tried to connect the dots. What was a 16-year-old doing here? Before I could even ask, another person walked in. A second friend, older, carrying a squirming toddler in her arms. I blinked. Was this real life? The whole group shuffled toward me, laughing loudly and cracking open cans of Monster Energy drinks as they plopped down at the booth. Yes, they had brought their own drinks into the diner. The server gave us a pointed look but said nothing, and I knew from that moment that the night was spiraling into something far beyond my control. I sat there, dumbfounded, as chaos unfolded around me. The toddler's mom, one of the 2 random tagalongs, quickly ran out of juice for the kid's sippy cup. Without missing a beat, she poured her Monster Energy drink into it and handed it back. The toddler took a few eager gulps before tossing the cup aside and grabbing the sugar shaker from the table. You know the kind, the metal cylinder with the little flap on top. The kid managed to dump sugar all over the table before shoving fistfuls of it into her mouth. The mom, she laughed. The friends, they laughed harder. And my date, she didn't even glance in my direction. I should have left then and there, but a part of me was too stunned to move. I kept thinking, this can't get worse. It always does. The 3 of them ignored me entirely, chatting amongst themselves like they were in their own private bubble. They reminisced about high school, gushing over which boys they'd had crushes on and who'd gotten fat after graduation. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. I might as well have been invisible. The server brought out my chicken sandwich, a lone island of normalcy in the chaos. I picked at it half-heartedly, tuning in and out of their conversation. I didn't even know how to interject, and at this point, I wasn't sure I wanted to. They were loud, oblivious, and obliviously loud. The toddler had graduated from eating sugar off the table to smearing it across her face, and nobody seemed to care. By the 5-minute mark, I'd given up on salvaging any sense of dignity. I focused on eating half of my sandwich, resigned to the fact that this was the worst date of my life. I didn't even know what the hell was happening anymore. Who brings a friend? Or 2? And a toddler? To a date? When I finally decided I couldn't take another second of this madness, I excused myself. Nobody noticed. Not my date, not her friends, not even the toddler, who was now licking sugar directly off the table like a deranged cat. I walked up to the counter, caught the server's eye, and apologized profusely for the disaster at the table. I slipped her $50, way more than the meal cost, but I couldn't leave knowing she'd have to clean up that mess without something to soften the blow. Then I got the hell out. As I walked to my car, the cool night air hit me, and I felt like I'd escaped a war zone. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel and drove home. I didn't even bother checking my phone when I got back. My roommates were waiting, eager for the post-date debrief. "How'd it go?" one of them asked, grinning. I flopped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling for a long moment before answering. Let me tell you about the worst night of my life. And so, I recounted the chaos, the monster-drinking toddler, the sugar-covered table, the bizarre absence of any acknowledgement that I was even there. By the end, my roommates were howling with laughter. It sounds like a fever dream, one of them said. You're making this up. I wish I was, I muttered. That night, I swore off OkCupid for good. I don't know what happened to my date or her entourage, and I don't care. But one thing's for sure, no amount of late-night hunger is worth what I went through. I was walking down the street, cradling my old beat-up flip phone, the kind that creaked when you flipped it open and felt like a relic even then. I was wrapping up a phone call when it happened. Wham! My shoulder slammed into someone, and the phone slipped out of my hand, clattering to the sidewalk. Sorry, I stammered, kneeling to retrieve it. My brain barely registered the person I'd collided with, a quick flash of red hair, a murmured apology from her, and I was already hustling back to work. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I flipped it open, expecting another work call. Hello. Hey, a soft voice said, tinged with amusement. I think we accidentally swapped phones. For a second, I didn't understand. But then it clicked, same model, same beat-up state. I'd grabbed her phone in the chaos. Oh wow, I think you're right. My bad. No worries, she said, laughing lightly. Want to meet up after work to switch back? We agreed on a coffee shop near downtown, and when I walked in later that day, I spotted her instantly. She was sitting near the window, a sharp, professional-looking ginger in a suit dress, sipping on what looked like an espresso. She glanced up, caught my eye, and smiled. I won't lie, she was cute. Really cute. The kind of cute that makes you sit up straighter and wish you'd bothered ironing your shirt that morning. We chatted for a while, both laughing at the absurdity of the phone mix-up. She worked at a bank, loved the same movies I did, and even joked about how she thought fate might have orchestrated the whole incident. Before I knew it, we'd made plans for dinner that weekend. Saturday evening rolled around, and I was optimistic. Maybe this was one of those meet-cute stories people gush about. I pulled up to her place, parked, and waited. When the door opened, I blinked. Twice. The ginger who walked out was barely recognizable. Gone was the polished bank attire, replaced by platform boots that must have added at least 4 inches to her height, fishnet stockings that shimmered in the porch light, and a corset-like top that left little to the imagination. Her hair, once sleek, was now spiked dramatically. Wow, I said, scrambling to keep my surprise in check. You look ready for a fun night. She laughed. I know, right? Let's go. I shrugged off my hesitation, reminding myself not to judge a book by its cover. Style was personal, and if her personality was as great as it had been at the coffee shop, this could still be amazing. On the way, we fell into an easy rhythm. She laughed at my jokes, matched my banter, and even one-upped me a few times. My spirits lifted. She asked what the plan was for the night, and I decided to joke about it. Well, I said, grinning, I'm taking you to my absolute favorite high-end dining establishment. If you're lucky, I might even supersize it. McDonald's, she said, catching on immediately and playing along. A Big Mac? Oh, be still my heart. We both laughed, and I felt the tension from earlier melt away. This girl might have wild fashion, but she had wit to match. When we pulled into the parking lot of a cozy, upscale pub, I killed the engine. Her smile faltered. What about McDonald's? At first, I thought she was kidding, but the look on her face told me she wasn't. I chuckled nervously. I was joking about that. Thought you caught on. Oh, she said, her tone flat. Okay. We headed inside and found a table. The vibe was warm and inviting, a place where the dim lighting and wooden beams made it feel timeless. I ordered a scotch to steady my nerves. She, however, ordered the largest boot of Bud Light I'd ever seen. For a moment, I was impressed by her confidence, until she leaned in close and whispered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. I can't believe they let his kind into a place like this. We'd better check our food for spit. I froze. Our waiter was black, and he'd just walked away from our table. The man had ears, and judging by the stiffening of his shoulders, he'd heard every word. My stomach dropped. Surely I misheard her. Nobody says things like that in public, right? But no. She kept going, leaning over her massive glass boot and whispering a steady stream of vile commentary about racial superiority. I could feel the panic bubbling up inside me. The cozy pub, the polished wooden beams, the faint hum of laughter from nearby tables, it all felt surreal. How had this funny, engaging woman from the coffee shop turned into this? Dinner arrived, and she made a show of inspecting her plate for spit. My appetite vanished, replaced by a nauseating cocktail of secondhand embarrassment and anger. I caught the waiter's eye and gave him a look I hoped conveyed my apologies. He nodded faintly, his professionalism unwavering. By the time she'd polished off 3 more boots of beer, I was counting down the minutes until I could escape. She excused herself to the bathroom, giving me the opportunity to settle the check. I waved over the waiter and apologized profusely. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice calm and measured. "There are all kinds of people in this world." He gave me a small, understanding smile that only made me feel worse. I tipped him generously, hoping it would at least soften the blow of the night. When she returned, I braced myself for round 2. Instead, she lit a cigarette in my car without asking, filling the small space with smoke. "We should totally go shooting at my dad's farm," she said, exhaling casually. "What's your favorite gun?" I muttered something about not being much of a shooter and pointed out that it was getting late. Thankfully, she didn't argue. When I dropped her off, she turned to me with a smile. "This was great, except for that slur waiter. We should totally get that Big Mac next time. See you soon." I didn't even respond. I just nodded, forced a weak smile, and drove off. As soon as I turned the corner, I let out a shaky breath. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. What the hell had just happened? When I got home, I replayed the entire night in my head, disbelief washing over me in waves. The initial charm, the jokes, the sharp descent into something dark and ugly. It was like dating 2 entirely different people. I blocked her number before I even made it to my front door. Swapped phones with a cute ginger, went on a date, discovered she was wildly racist and generally unhinged. 0 out of 10, would not recommend. About a year ago, I went on a date with this guy who I had a few classes with. Let's call him Dice Guy. I lost touch with Dice Guy after the classes were over, and a few months later, he adds me on Facebook during the 2nd semester of my freshman year. We exchange some messages, and he begins to explain that he has dropped out of university due to personal reasons. To be honest, I really didn't know much about him other than the insightful comments he made during class discussions. One day I was bored, and he suggests that we go out on a date. What was about to come was worst date ever. Because he dropped out of the university, he lives at home. He has a license to drive as well as some cars. I lived about 30 minutes away, and he asks me to drive. I thought, okay, might as well, because we were headed for a zoo about 20 more minutes away. He lived closer to it. I pick him up, he loads my car with his camera gear, a backpack, a heavy-ass tripod, and some random equipment. We're just going to the goddamn zoo, not a National Geographic photo shoot in the Costa Rican rainforests. I ended up wasting half a tank of gas, $30, just to pick him up and go to the zoo. I had also paid $5 for parking. Admission was cheap, about $7 for students, and because he still had his student ID, he got in for that price. Usually guys would offer to pay for movie tickets or dinners and whatnot, but Dice Guy thought I didn't deserve this. I paid for gas money and parking, and soon I will find I will pay for a lot of things, and the Chia Pass wouldn't fork over $7, so I ended up paying for it. The zoo had some pretty miserable-looking animals, and Dice Guy went on and on about his photographic repertoire. He then started talking about how he likes watching animals being eaten by other animals and how attractive Virginia Woolf was. When I spoke, he would immediately interrupt with his own stories or ask me why my stories were worth talking about. We later went out to eat, and when the check arrived, he looked at me expectantly. The meal was only about $20 for both of us. He still didn't offer to pay, but would begrudgingly pay for his own. I had to take the check to the waitress to split it, and we ended up paying separately. When I thought the date was over, he suggests that we should drive an hour towards our university. It was still early in the day, and I told him I was almost out of gas. He says, "Well, go get some." I was stupid enough to do this, thinking he would pay, but nope. Instead, after I got back into the car and on the interstate, he whips out this big plastic canister containing a bunch of rocks. However, these rocks were colorful, geometric, and had numbers on them. I asked him what he was doing, and he said, "Oh, I'm just looking at them. These are my dice for Dungeons and Dragons. I always keep them in my pocket, because I never want to lose them." I laughed nervously and thought I would let this slide. After all, most people have their own hobbies and interests that they're passionate about. While driving, he started to rant about his ex-girlfriend. I had a few classes with her, and she was a very sweet girl. Dice Guy disagrees, and was apparently still bitter about their breakup. He said, "Yeah, I still stalk her on Facebook. She has a boyfriend." I sent her emails telling her she made love like a statue and what a sadistic bitch she was. I just nodded and kept driving. He continues, "When she didn't reply to those emails, I started emailing all her other email accounts she had in junior high and tried getting passwords to them. I asked, 'Why did you do that, Dice Guy?' I don't know, but she deleted those email accounts. I tried getting a hold of her new ones. I also emailed her new boyfriend and chewed him out. You should see it. I did such a good job." At this point I was already scared of him, but then he begins to elaborate on dropping out of university. Turns out that he was actually suspended for some reason. He will not tell me exactly why, which made his roommate freak out. His roommate had reported him to the university police, and Dice Guy was instructed to pack up his things and leave, never to return. I asked him if it was okay to go visit the university, and he said no, because there is a detective guy working there, and he caught me on campus before. It's okay though, I doubt he'll see me. I wasn't aware of what was going on, but apparently Dice Guy probably did something really bad that the university needs a detective to be on the lookout for him. I had my iPod plugged into the car and music was playing, and Dice Guy disconnects the AUX cord and plugs in his voice recorder. "WTF, Dice Guy? I want you to listen to my voice in the very last lecture I attended. It's a recording he made of himself talking to his instructor in a class, and how he felt about being suspended from school. I forget most of what the recording was about, but the bulk of it began with, 'Hello, can I go off topic and tell everyone what's been bothering me?' Dice Guy went on a tirade about not trusting anyone anymore, especially his roommate. You can hear the snickers from other students in the background and how flustered the instructor was. It was extremely painful to listen to. We walked around campus, and he started pulling out some papers. It was graded by a professor, and Dice Guy started beaming. This was the best paper I've ever written. I keep it around with me all the time. I asked him why he carried it around with him, but instead he pulled out more stuff. There was some hideous drawing with a snake eating its own tail and ugly writing all around it. This is a piece of artwork I made. I'm going to have it as a medallion one day. It was starting to get late, and there would be a long drive home, so we headed back. On the way, there is a toll booth, $5. Of course, I end up paying while Dice Guy replays his fucking recording again over my car stereo. I was already extremely infuriated and sped him back to his house another hour. We said goodbyes, and he immediately texts me later asking to hang out again, but I didn't reply. The following day, he texts me again. "Hey, I left my camera equipment in your car." Great. A friend told me that he would purposely leave his shit, in my case, camera equipment, in cars just to revisit you again in case you break off contact. Dice Guy finds out where I work. I had the opening shift, and goes to take his equipment. My workplace hasn't opened yet, but the pet store next door was, and he drags me inside to look at snakes. I would love a snake and watch it feed on mice. I love watching animals kill things too. Isn't it so epic? I had cut off contact with him and ignored his texts after that day. He would sometimes go into my workplace and try to talk to me, but I would immediately try to speak to another customer and look busy. Some of my co-workers even warned me if he was in the store, in which case I would hide. I ended up quitting my job in order to focus on school, and he messaged me almost a few days after I quit asking what I was up to, and if I still worked at the same place, and if I wanted to go out on a date again. After I blocked him, he made another FB account asking why I blocked him. Honestly, I was fucking scared of this guy. I'll never forget the night I swiped right on disaster. It started innocently enough, an exchange of messages on Tinder, his profile picture showcasing a disarming smile and a laid-back confidence. His name was Daniel, and for days we texted about everything under the sun, favorite movies, the books we were totally going to finish someday, and the weird quirks of our new city. He seemed normal, charming even, and after a few phone calls, we decided to meet in person. Little did I know I was about to meet the man who would forever be saved in my contacts as Donotancer Penispic. The restaurant was a cozy bar downtown, dimly lit with warm amber tones and a low hum of conversation. When I walked in, Daniel waved me over to the table he'd chosen. He was undeniably cute, tousled brown hair, a strong jawline, and a confident grin that hinted at mischief. But as we settled in, that charm quickly began to fray. Something about him felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. He was smiling, sure, but there was a bitterness in his eyes, as if the world owed him an apology. He launched into a tirade about the city. "I mean, this place is such a joke compared to California," he scoffed, swirling the drink he'd already half finished before I even arrived. "People here are just so uptight, you know? Like, especially about sex. Back home, people know how to live." I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "I guess every city has its quirks," I offered, trying to steer the conversation somewhere lighter. But Daniel was like a storm gathering strength. He leaned in, his tone growing conspiratorial, and started talking about sex, specifically his frustration with how prudish people were here. It wasn't playful or flirty. It was unsettling, like he was trying to test how far he could push. The waitress came by, a cheerful young woman who clearly didn't deserve what was about to happen. Daniel ordered a plate of fries, but when they arrived, he scrutinized them like they'd personally offended him. "Yeah, these aren't crispy enough," he declared, sending them back without a second glance. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he turned to the waitress and said, "Hey, my company's throwing a party this weekend. You should come by." Her polite smile faltered for a split second before she nodded and walked away. I sat there, stunned. Did he really just hit on the waitress in the middle of our date? Trying to salvage the evening, I pulled out my phone to show him a picture of my dog, a golden retriever with an uncanny ability to cheer me up no matter how bad a day I was having. "This is Max," I said, smiling. "He's basically my best friend." Daniel glanced at the photo, then smirked. "Oh yeah," he said, pulling out his phone. "Check this out." And then, as casually as someone showing off their new car or a vacation photo, he turned his screen toward me. Staring back at me was a picture of his penis. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. I blinked, hoping I'd misinterpreted what I was seeing. But no, there it was in all its unwelcome glory. My brain scrambled to process the sheer audacity, the blatant disregard for any semblance of decency. I wanted to laugh, cry, scream, all at once. I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell?" He chuckled, as if he'd just shared an inside joke. "What? You're cute. I thought you'd appreciate it." "Appreciate it?" I could barely breathe. The room felt suddenly claustrophobic, the warm amber tones now suffocating. I needed to get out of there. The rest of the date was a blur of awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at small talk. When the check finally came, I didn't even pretend to linger. We walked out together to the valet stand, the air between us thick with discomfort. My car came first, a merciful stroke of luck. I mumbled a quick goodbye and practically dove into the driver's seat, my heart racing as I sped away. It wasn't until later that I realized my sweater was missing. In my haste to escape, I must have dropped it somewhere between the restaurant and the valet. I debated texting Daniel about it, but decided against it. I didn't want to give him any excuse to prolong our interaction. Of course, Daniel didn't leave it at that. A text lit up my phone that night. "Hey, you left your sweater. If you want it back, you'll have to hang out with me again, winky face." I stared at the message, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. The audacity, the sheer entitlement. It was like he thought he held my sweater hostage, as if a piece of clothing was worth enduring another second of his company. I typed out a response, then deleted it. No sweater was worth this. I blocked his number and let out a long sigh, mourning the loss of my favorite sweater but grateful to be free of him. That night, I saved his contact under a name that would serve as both a warning and a reminder. Dono Tancer Penispic. It felt like a fitting epitaph for the brief, nightmarish chapter he'd written into my life. At the time, I thought it was quirky, maybe even endearing. In hindsight, it was a massive neon red flag waving furiously in the wind. He picked me up at my house that evening, grinning like this was the beginning of something grand. I was nervous but excited. First dates are supposed to feel special, and I was ready to see what he had planned. Little did I know his plan was nothing. We drove a single block to his friend Tony's house. I figured he just needed to grab something real quick. But instead, he marched straight into the backyard, cupped his hands around his mouth, and started yelling, "Tony! Tony!" The night air carried his voice far and wide, but there was no answer. After a minute, he scowled, muttered something under his breath, and stormed back to the car. Without a word of explanation, he got behind the wheel and sped off. "So, where are we going?" I asked hesitantly, glancing out the window at unfamiliar streets. He didn't answer. He just drove, zigzagging through backroads like he was avoiding something, or maybe just lost. We finally pulled up to the bowling alley, and he announced, "I wanted to surprise you." "Surprise?" I thought, skeptical. More like he had no clue where he was going. But hey, bowling sounded fun, so I let it go. The first game started off well enough. I won, which didn't seem to bother him much at first. "I let you win," he said, laughing. "I'm nice like that." But by the second game, he wasn't laughing anymore. I won again, and the smile on his face turned into a tight-lipped grimace. By the third game, it wasn't just a grimace, it was full-blown frustration. He was sweating, cursing under his breath, and glaring at the pins like they owed him money. "Want bumpers?" I teased, trying to lighten the mood. He didn't even look at me. He just plopped down on the bench across from me, arms crossed like a sulking child. I won game 3. "That was fun," I said, hoping to diffuse the tension. "I used to be on a bowling league, so I guess I've got an unfair advantage." His scowl deepened. We left shortly after. Next stop, Chinese food. Things seemed to calm down over dinner. We ate, chatted, and for a moment, I thought the night might actually turn itself around. But then he went up to the counter to get a refill on his drink, and the cashier told him there was a 15-cent charge. That's when it all fell apart. "Are you kidding me?" he snapped, loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and stormed back to the table. "We're leaving," he barked, his face red with anger. I hadn't even finished my food, but I wasn't about to argue. We got in the car, and he drove us. Where else? Back to Tony's house. He stomped into the backyard and once again started yelling, "Tony! Tony!" Still no answer. I finally asked, "Why are we here?" "I wanted to finish the video game we were playing earlier," he said matter-of-factly, like that was the most normal thing in the world. With nothing left to do, he drove me the 1 block back to my house. I got out of the car, said goodnight, and went inside feeling utterly baffled. That was my first date with him. And somehow, against all odds, we ended up dating for a year and a half. Things didn't end until Valentine's Day, a date so catastrophic, it made the first one look like a fairy tale. I'd just gotten off an 8-hour shift waitressing, my feet aching and my patience worn thin. On the drive home, he texted me, "Hurry up and get ready." I just wanted to shower and rest for a minute, but he insisted I be ready earlier than the 9 p.m. time I'd suggested. He never mentioned reservations or plans, so I figured he just wanted to hang out. When he picked me up, he barely said a word. The silence was deafening as we drove, tension filling the car like a heavy fog. We finally pulled up to BJ's, a chain restaurant that was clearly packed. "It looks busy," I said, eyeing the line of people waiting outside. "We're not going to get a table." "I had a reservation," he snapped, "but you weren't ready on time." That was the match that lit the fire. We started arguing, him furious about the missed reservation, me furious that he'd never told me about it. The fight escalated quickly. I reminded him that I was the only one with a job and that I'd likely be paying for dinner, just like every other date we went on. He retorted that his parents didn't give him money because they didn't like me. Then he started punching the steering wheel. Hard. Over and over, his fists slamming into the wheel like it had personally insulted him. That's when I noped the hell out of the car. I ran to the nearest closed-down furniture store and called a co-worker, telling him I needed a ride. My ex followed me, still fuming, but I turned and yelled, "Stay away from me. You're never going to see me again." My co-worker, bless him, left his own date to come pick me up. The next day, I went to my ex's house to grab my stuff and give back the promise ring he'd given me. When I handed it to him, he said, "Hopefully the next girl will appreciate it more." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You might want to think twice about giving that to someone else." He texted me later that night, saying, "Give me some time, and maybe we can be friends." I never replied. I never saw him again. The coworker who picked me up that night? He had feelings for me. We started dating, and 5 years later, we're still together, happier than I ever thought possible, with a wedding on the horizon. Funny how life works out. Went on a blind date that my friend set me up on at a local bar with a live music night. It went well, and we decided we might do it again. The next weekend we met at a big art show/festival and decided it was a good night for some karaoke at a favorite local dive. She had had a couple drinks, and so had I, but everyone seemed pretty with it. On the drive over to the bar, she was looking around on the floor of the car while driving down a busy street and started to veer into the parked lane of cars. I managed to grab the wheel and correct before we slammed into the back of a parked car, which we most definitely would have hit if I hadn't. Strike one, bad driver, she's a distracted chick, etc. Sexist maybe, but in this case very true. About that time, she told me she hadn't eaten that evening and was feeling a little tipsy. We got to the bar in one piece and started to enjoy the karaoke and some more beers. After another beer or two, she began to let her hand wander around my crotch, etc., which I was fine with. Then she started to pinch me on the arm and what we called horsebitting, basically taking a handful of flesh and pinching and pulling at the same time on the inside of my thigh. Now I'm all for some rough play and aggressive folding, but this fucking hurt. I had to pin her hands to her lap and tell her to stop. By this point she was pretty drunk, it would seem, punctuated by nearly knocking the prompt monitor off its table while singing some damn song. I decided it was time to leave, and her being obviously rather on the trash side, I opted to drive because in Houston, it's basically a calculated risk of who's the least drunk. Dumb maybe, but she was still coherent and wanted me to come over. Sex makes dumb. So we start driving towards her neighborhood, which is on the opposite side of the city from mine, and about halfway there she tells me to pull into a side street. I do so, and she dives like a scuba enthusiast and starts giving me the business on the side of the road. I enjoy this for a while, but we're not really that far off the map, and cops in Houston like to patrol the burbs looking for degenerate idiots doing dodgy things in cars. Also, it appeared we were near her place, based on her previous information given. So I zip up, buckle up, and we start off towards her hood once again. She promptly passes the fuck out. This presents a difficulty as she didn't ever tell me an exact address, just a general area. I repeatedly try to wake her up to the point where she can be exacting in her location finding capacity. So there I am driving around buzzed with a passed out girl in the passenger seat in a neighborhood which caters to a certain demographic that is decidedly not my own and rhymes with Flixican. Not usually a problem, but at 1 a.m. on a Saturday night is not where I needed to be driving around aimlessly. At this point I make the decision that she's not going to be any damn help and that I should just drive home and put her up in my extra bed. She's mumbling the odd nonsense about, right over there, nobody knows yada yada. So after a white-knuckle drive with Houston's finest on my tail for a good portion, I make it home and carry her passed out ass up to my place. After checking to make sure she has a pulse and water and all that jazz, I dump her in the guest bed and start to get ready for bed. All of a sudden she's walking around, bumping into things and generally being a confused drunk. I ask her what she needs, and she pushes past me into the bathroom and slams the door. Fair enough. I leave her for a few minutes, but after 10 I realize she's probably passed out in there, which I'm just not going to have. She is indeed passed out face down on the floor blocking the door. After a little creative pushing and pulling I get inside and get her back on her bed. She starts ranting about how I'm being a stupid boy and something else about how I have no inbox. I've dealt with hammered chicks before, but this was a new one. She kept repeating something about my lack of an inbox and then lurched into my kitchen and began banging around. I walked in and asked what she was looking for. A bowl, she growled. I was glad to give up a mixing bowl if it was going to keep my sheets and floor clear of vomit, so I got her a large one and tried to figure out how to convince her to go back to bed or hit the bathroom to deal with her purge. She told me to go away and leave her alone, so I went to the opposite side of my apartment out of sight and waited while she banged around a bit more. Then I heard a wet splat and a groan. I called over, "Are you okay? Are you puking?" To which I got the unbelievably disturbing answer, "No, I'm pooping." My heart sank. This girl was dropping a deuce in my mixing bowl in my kitchen. I sort of clammed up and waited for it to end. After a minute I heard her stumble to the bathroom and dump the bowl into the toilet, run some water, drop the bowl and stumble back to her bed. I nervously did a sweep of the place to survey the damage. No turd on the floor in Tay kitchen, but the ghost of horrible acts very present. The bathroom was undisturbed, minus the very conspicuous blue mixing bowl sitting next to the john, with a not-so-blue film coating the inside. She had managed to rinse it, but not well. I gagged a little, decided to deal with it in the morning. I checked once more to make sure she was stationary, and went to sleep wishing it a bad dream. The next morning I awoke to her telling me she had a great time from what she remembered, and that she had to get to work. No mention of recollection of the night's previous events registered in her salutations. I decided to let the sleeping dog lie for the sake of her dignity, and told her her basic geographical location. She chipperly bade me a fair day, and was out the door. I got up, found a trash bag and a rubber glove, walked into the bathroom, and trashed that bowl faster than you can say shit. I was in shock for days, and never called again. I'd met her on Plenty of Fish, and for 2 weeks, we'd been messaging nonstop. She seemed smart, funny, and even a little quirky in a charming way. So when she suggested we meet for dinner, I thought, why not? The evening began smoothly enough. We met at a casual steakhouse, the kind of place with dim lighting and country music playing softly in the background. She was even prettier in person, dark hair, confident smile, eyes that sparkled when she talked. We laughed, shared stories, and ordered our food. For a moment, everything felt easy, natural, like we were two people who could actually have something. Then he showed up. I didn't notice him at first, too caught up in the conversation. But when he stormed up to our table, his voice cut through the ambient noise of the restaurant like a blade. "What the fuck are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. He was pointing at her, his face twisted with fury. Her entire demeanor shifted. She stiffened, her smile vanishing as she turned to face him. "What the hell do you want, Greg?" she snapped, her voice sharp and biting. "I told you to stay the fuck away from me," he yelled, leaning closer to the table. "You're insane. You ruin everything you touch." The entire restaurant fell silent, all eyes turning toward us. I sat frozen, unsure whether to step in or let them hash it out. The tension was suffocating, like standing at the edge of an active volcano. She fought back, matching his insults with venom of her own. It was like watching a grenade with a loose pin. Any second, it was going to blow. I managed to get between them, raising my hands in an attempt to de-escalate. Hey, let's calm down," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. The manager was already on his way over, his phone out, ready to call the cops. "We don't want to cause a scene here." For a moment, it seemed to work. Greg took a step back, his chest heaving, while she sat down, her expression a mask of icy calm. The manager hovered nearby, waiting to intervene if things got worse. And then it happened. She picked up her steak knife. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no warning. One moment she was sitting there, eerily quiet, and the next, she lunged across the table and drove the knife into Greg's chest. The sound was sickening, a dull, wet thud that seemed to echo in the silence of the restaurant. Greg staggered back, clutching at the knife, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and spreading quickly. My heart slammed in my chest as I stumbled to my feet, but before I could react, she turned to me. Her face was blank, disturbingly calm, but her eyes, God, her eyes were wild. They locked onto me with a terrifying intensity, and I knew in that instant that she wasn't done. She gripped the knife, now slick with blood, and started moving toward me. "Hey, stop," I said, my voice cracking with panic. I backed away, my hand instinctively going to my waistband where my Glock rested. "Don't do this." She didn't stop. Her steps were slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. Her bloody hand raised the knife as she took another step forward, her gaze unwavering. I didn't think. I couldn't. My body acted on pure instinct. I drew the gun and fired. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. She jerked back, dropping the knife as she grabbed at her shoulder, blood blooming across her clavicle. She stumbled but didn't fall, her expression shifting from rage to shock as the weight of what had just happened seemed to hit her all at once. The restaurant erupted into chaos. People screamed, diving under tables or scrambling for the exits. Greg collapsed onto the floor, groaning weakly, while she stood there, swaying slightly, her hand still pressed against her wound. The police arrived within minutes. They found me standing there, the gun still in my hand, my body trembling uncontrollably. I quickly set it down and raised my hands, babbling about self-defense, about how she'd attacked him, and then came at me. Thankfully, the restaurant's cameras and the dozens of horrified witnesses corroborated my story. The officers reviewed the footage, and after a tense few hours of questioning, they determined that I'd acted in self-defense. Florida's Stand Your Ground law covered me, and I was cleared to go. As for her, she was taken to the hospital and later transferred to a psychiatric facility. The police told me she had a history of violent outbursts, likely exacerbated by untreated bipolar disorder. Greg survived, but I never found out what happened to him after that night. The whole experience shook me to my core. One minute, I thought I was on a promising first date. The next, I was fighting for my life against someone I barely knew. Unless someone died in a date, hey, who knows, I do believe I have the worst date ever. I mean, ever. So, I'm newly single from a bad breakup of 5 years. She leaves me for another gal, and her friends, feminazis, decide to right a wrong and rob me of everything I own, save for my dog, bed, and some of my clothes. Anyways, so I'm a few months along, and try a dating website, Yahoo Personals. A gal messages me, she's Hispanic. I'm white, I don't discriminate. And I'm like, alright, your picture looks okay. You type a little innocently immature, but text is sterile. I give her a shot, and we meet a bit south of me in a mall. It's public, they have restaurants. If things don't work out well, that's fine, we can go our separate ways. So I go there, and she messages me where she is in the mall, and I see a gal, but it doesn't look much of anything like the gal I've been talking to. Sorta, but like her uglier sister. Well, it's her. She photoshopped her pictures. A lot. Her smooth face in the pictures? Nah, moles all over. I'm not talking 1 to 2, I mean like dozens. All over her face. It's so strange and repulsive. Most guys would be like, I'm out biatch, but I don't want to hurt her feelings. I figure I'll chat, see what's up. I introduce myself to her, she says hi, and we walk through the mall. I notice a few minutes later someone is following us, shop to shop. Oh, that's my mom, she says. It bothers me a bit, and I ask, why is her mom here? By the way, we are both 25 plus. She explains her mom came along for the meet. With her brother-in-law. And his wife, pregnant, by the way, 8 months along. The gal keeps trying to kiss me in every store, but her mom is literally in the other all giving me the eye. It's freaky as hell, and not in a good way. So we, after an hour, go to the food court and get some food with the entire family. They seem nice, but it's just too damned creepy. They invite me back to their place for cards and family games. No orgies, but more of a grilling. They want me back at their place to grill me about their daughter. Not good for me. My stomach starts acting up as we're finishing up dinner, but it's not feeling like my stomach, like a weird diarrheal feeling. I excuse myself to the bathroom, where the feeling of needing to go intensifies quickly. I enter the bathroom, downing an Imodium as I enter. I'm sweating, and I do not feel good at all. I saddle up to the toilet, not much, and the feeling moves into my kidneys. It's all fast, I'm sweating, I don't feel good at all. It's not food poisoning, my stomach is fine, but I feel like I have a goddamned iron spike moving from my kidneys to my dick, and I'm not liking this at all, and it's getting bad. I see her outside the bathroom, and she says her family has gone to meet us nearby for me to follow them to their house, but we're parked at different areas of the mall, so we're to meet up at a nearby Denny's. While driving there, my dick track feels like it's on fire. The pain is too intense, I'm afraid I've broken something, and I don't know what, or how. We get to the Denny's parking lot, and I bust inside. Customers only, the sign says, but I don't give a fuck. I get into the bathroom, pull up to a urinal, and whip out my tang. At this point, I'm either going to shit my pants, piss an iron spike out, or pass out. I actually briefly pass out for a second. I catch myself falling against the wall in pain, but nothing coming out. I zip up and stumble outside. My ugly fucking date is standing next to my car, and the world goes gray, such a weird fucking feeling. I fall into the grass on my knees. The pain is so intense, I'm half a second from passing out. I try and mumble something to her about being in mortal pain, that I might need to go to the doctor, and there she is, 1/2 an inch from my face, hairy moles all over her face. I want to puke on her, but I'm in so much pain, and she closes her eyes, and moves in a bit further for a kiss. A fucking kiss. While I'm passing out in pain, I push her away and stumble to my car and manage to peel out. I'm not sure how I made it to the highway. I should have gone to the hospital. I don't even know how I managed much of anything. Once I got back to my apartment about an hour later, the pain was gone, just a little pebble in the toilet. 6 months ago, I started talking to a girl from an online dating site. She was sweet, kind, and pretty. After a few weeks of chatting, we decided to meet and go see a movie, her suggestion. I would have rather gone for a beer at a pub, so being the gentleman that I am, I agreed. Turns out she only lives a few blocks away from me. I pull up in my car and wait for her. Normally I would have gone to the front door. However, she asked that I text her when I was out front, and she'd meet me at the car. I sit there waiting for 10 minutes, and she finally comes out. So does her cousin and her cousin's boyfriend. She tells me that they're coming along. Goody great. Her cousin is pushing 300 pounds, loud and I'll be frank, ugly as sin. And her cousin's boyfriend is a trashier scumbag, Steve. He works in the oil field, and both he and her cousin like to smoke a lot of doobies. I know this because all the way to the theater, that's all those two would talk about. The girl I was meeting was pretty quiet the whole way through. Anyways, we get to the movie. It was Resident Evil 3D, and during the previews all three of them were getting giant erections over the Saw 3D trailers. Movie starts, and 20 minutes and her cousin has a melodramatic panic attack over the 3D, giving her a massive headache. Her giant cousin proceeds to leave and enter the theater about 50 times. She's big, she smells bad, is loud, and had no respect for the people trying to watch the movie at all. Movie ends, and we all go outside. Her cousin then proceeds to dry hump her boyfriend on the bench outside while they share a cigarette. Fast forward 30 minutes, and I drop them off at home. I say goodnight and speed away. This is where the story should end. But halfways home I get a call from the girl asking that I come over and chill out with them. I honestly wanted to say no, but I figured I wasn't doing anything, and this might turn out to be something funny to tell one day. I go back and enter her house. I now know why she had me wait outside when I picked them up. She lives at home with her parents, which is fine. That's not an issue for me. Her cousin and boyfriend live downstairs in the basement. The main floor of the house looks like an episode of Hoarders. It was filled with trash. Everywhere. I keep my shoes on and ask where the washroom is. Having a big drink at the movie had me wanting to pee pretty bad. I find the washroom, flick on the light, and there is piss and shit all over the toilet. On the seat, on the tank, around it. I pee and flush with my foot. I touch nothing. I even managed to turn the doorknob with my elbows. Anyways, after that I sat for an hour watching South Park and playing with two very cute cats. I ignored everyone for the most part. I caught bits of conversation between her cousin and her boyfriend. Lots of dirty talk, lots of, oh, you're gonna be my hubby, and I'm gonna fuck you so hard sort of shit. It made me sick. So after the hour was up I tell the girl that I have to go. I have to be up early to make an appointment at the bank. Lie. She walks me upstairs, and as I'm saying goodbye at the front door, about 10 cats that I hadn't seen before literally emerge from the garbage in the living room. I left, and hadn't talked to her for about 6 months. Last week she messages me on MSN. She asks me how I've been. I tell her I've been okay. She tells me she has good news. I ask what. She tells me she's getting married. Oh, that's good. To who? I ask. She says John. I say, who's John? She says the guy we went to the movies with.